With the insiders, Chris Johnston, Pierre, LeBrun, and Darren Dreger. The draft is done, but the to-do lists, they remain, gentlemen, and they are long for some teams. Certainly the Toronto Maple Leafs, that's the case. Pierre, high on the list has to be some contracts. Matthews and Nylander in particular. We were speculating on the market for Nylander. How would you characterize negotiations?
Well, what I would say is this. The first thing you need to figure out is how important is Saturday, July 1st, in terms of William Nylander's modified no-trade kicking in. And my sense is it's not paramount, that's not seen as a deadline by the Toronto Maple Leafs to either have him signed or trade him. So they have some rope to play with there. But what I will tell you is I don't believe negotiations are in a great place. I think that Nylander's ask is certainly above what the Leafs would be comfortable doing right now in an extension. The flip side to all that is, okay, well then trade him. Have you noticed the trades this week in the NHL? It's hard to move big players and get decent value back. So listen, the Leafs are in a tough place here, but they're going to keep trying to sign this player.
Well, one thing they're not going to do, Pierre, is the NHL's first buyout window closes Friday evening. They're not going to use that window to buy out Matt Murray at this time. And, there is a secondary window that opens later in the summer if you have a player that goes to arbitration, so there might be some wiggle room down the road. But at this point in time, I think that Brad Treliving wants to keep three goaltenders. That includes the young Joseph Woll, along with Ilya Samsonov and Matt Murray in the crease. As it comes to the other UFAs, there's a few players the Leafs are still talking with. The prices remain a little too high, and that's why we haven't seen more extensions like the David Kampf one. But Luke Schenn, I think there'll be another push here to get him signed before he can potentially hit the open market.
We've all been commenting on that trade scenario you just mentioned, how it just seems to be gummed up in the works there. But the Winnipeg Jets, Dregs, were not affected by that. Tough situation for Kevin Cheveldayoff. They end up being the ones making the big splash this week.
They did. They set the table for what we were hoping was to come, throughout the draft process, because the Winnipeg Jets turned a player who they knew wasn't going to sign in Pierre-Luc Dubois into four serviceable assets. Three of those young players, and at least two of the three, maybe all three, are going to be on the ice in the Winnipeg Jets lineup. So that is a significant turnaround for Winnipeg. But, they still have a couple of enormous question marks around key figures, and that's Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck. I think that there's been veiled interest, cautious interest in Mark Scheifele. And Connor Hellebuyck, as we've talked about, that's a little bit more complex, right? I mean, who doesn't want a Vezina caliber goaltender? The problem, as we've repeated ourselves over and over again, is the money in the system. And this is going to drag through July 1st. Winnipeg isn't likely going to want to retain money on Connor Hellebuyck in making a trade. And unless they're willing to do that or find a third party, then a team like the New Jersey Devils, who we've reported on, we know has interest in Hellebuyck, is going to find it difficult to make that work.
Hanifin and the Calgary Flames, where are things at with Craig Conroy?
Yeah, so listen, Craig Conroy is getting plenty of attention. I know Hanifin, it's just not the kind of attention he would like right now. My sense is that there have been some offers that are just not at the standard that would make Craig Conroy want to make that trade. And I get it. 25-year-old top four defenseman. Yeah. He's not giving this guy away. So I think it's important that the Flames have told teams, hey, if we don't get the trade we like, he's coming back to camp in September. They're willing to be patient here. The other thing is a guy like Dmitry Orlov, who's going to be the number one UFA defenseman on the market Saturday. Some of the same teams that have interest in Hanifin, I think, are going to take a run at Orlov. If they strike out, perhaps they circle back to Calgary.
As widely speculated, Ken Holland and the Edmonton Oilers open up some cap space by moving Kyler Yamamoto. Klim Kostin part of that deal as well, CJ. The cap space is there, but so too is an opening in their top six. Ken Holland needs to thread the needle here in free agency and look for somebody that can maybe compete for that spot.
Well, and there's obvious and apparent value there, at least that I see, in Connor Brown. And there's been a lot of people linking Brown to the Oilers. He played with Connor McDavid in Erie back in the day. He's represented by Jeff Jackson, the same agent as Connor McDavid. He's played with Zach Hyman in Toronto. I mean, there's some synergy here. And he's a unique case because he only played a handful of games last season in Washington before suffering an ACL tear. And because of that, I don't expect his deal to come in too high. Certainly not anything like the $3.1 million that Kyler Yamamoto would have been making. He can also be eligible for performance bonuses. So I think that there's a way where the Oilers create that cap room, sign Brown, and have a little bit of extra money to do some other business elsewhere.
And Erik Karlsson, Pierre, we talked about him tons heading into today, still hanging around out there.
Yeah, so my sense of that situation is that after a flurry of conversations between teams and the San Jose Sharks leading into the draft here, things are a bit of a standstill, and there's two reasons. One is because the Sharks, there's only so much they want to eat on Erik Karlsson's remaining contract, and that's a stomach block for some teams. Number two is the Sharks don't want to give him away. So either you get a better return and eat more if you're San Jose, or you eat less and you don't get much in return. That's where that thing is at.
All right, very short period of time between the end of the draft And the start of free agency has everybody scrambling to get out of Nashville and get back to work, including our insiders.